O'Leary's barn, O'Leary's barn gets demolished by the fire, but her home actually survives the fire. But Catherine O'Leary, the person who owned the barn, is blamed for the fire for the rest of her life. 60s, no one really used to talk about this building, but then I put a $800,000 "You Are Here" sign on the back of the structure. That red Lego piece is us. We're on the south branch of the Chicago River right now. We started up on the top, on the main branch on the top right, and the north branch on the top left, and now we're on the south branch where that red Lego piece is. So if you ever get lost along the Chicago River, on a kayak or a canoe, just kayak right over here. The sign will help you get home. I don't know if we have any Batman fans aboard this vessel. I'm a huge Batman fan myself. In the opening scene of the 2008 film, The Dark Knight, the Joker and his goons zipline onto the top of Gotham Bank. Real world Gotham Bank is on the right-hand side. It's the old main post office. Joker and his goons zipline from the Green Building onto the top of Gotham Bank. Joker exits Gotham Bank in a school bus going the wrong way down Van Buren Street under those flags on the right-hand side. So watch that opening scene of The Dark Knight after our tour on YouTube. It looks so much cooler now that you've seen where it was filmed. The lobby is open to the public Monday through Friday, so 9 to 5. So if you are a huge Batman fan, pop your head in. There's a food court inside. The building on the right is the old main post office, built in the 1930s when Chicago was the catalog capital of the world. All the catalogers were right here in Chicago in the 30s. Montgomery Ward, Marshall Fields, Sears Roebuck. It was like having 5 or 10 Amazons in one single town. They needed this structure, the largest post office on earth at the time of construction, to help them manage their mail. But these days it's way too big to be a post office, so it's been converted to a commercial office building. You can work there. It's still a very complex use of urban land. This federal highway runs right through the base of the old post office. A live active train line runs right under the old post office, left to right. And on top of the old post office sits the largest rooftop park on planet Earth. That rooftop park is not public. It's a private rooftop park for tenants. So I've never been out there. It just was opened up 6 months ago. But if anyone knows anyone who works there, let me know. I'll tour. When we come out from that noisy Federal Bridge, we'll have a moment to go into storytelling mode. I'll have a moment to tell Chicago's foundational story, which is best told in 3 very quick acts. The first act of Chicago's story starts about 5 blocks to our right, to our front right, at around 9:30 at night on DeKoven Street in 1871 in Catherine O'Leary's barn. You see, in October of 1871, the city had never been drier. There had been no rain from July to October, and much of the city was constructed in wood, crucially including the sidewalks. Chicago was the capital of the West, 1871. The sidewalks were 5-foot elevated wood sidewalks like you were living in a western town. There's no public building in Chicago other than the courthouse and churches in 1871. So it's very much a western city. A fire breaks out 5 blocks to our front right in O'Leary's barn at 9:30 at night. And due to high winds, fire tornadoes appear. The fire tornadoes pick up pieces of wood 5, 10, 15 feet long and throw them several blocks behind where the firemen are fighting the fire. One of those pieces of wood is thrown by the fire tornadoes across the river, landing in a big coal bin, which ignites, bringing the fire to the other side of the river, to the loop. Another fire tornado picks up a 15-foot long piece of wood, throws it across the main branch of the river when we got on the boat, hitting the kerosene train, which explodes, bringing the fire all the way to the north. The fire destroys all of the north side, all of the loop, and not much of the area to the right where the fire began. Remember, the winds were going 40 miles per hour to our back left, so you were actually safe here on the right-hand side where the fire began, but everyone ran to the lakefront and jumped into the water. That was the worst place to hide from the fire because the winds were picking up those pieces of wood and launching them into the lake. The people who ran out to the prairie had it pretty good. They just hung out into the prairie for the 3 days of the fire. There were so many people out on the prairie that for so many days they had to send wheelbarrows to get everyone to bring them back to the city. So the fire rages for 36 hours and only stops due to rains. The fire destroys 3.5 miles of the city of Chicago. 100,000 Chicagoans are made homeless. 300 souls lose their lives. The fire is the worst, and hear me out, also the best thing to ever happen to Chicago, and I will quickly explain. You see, the year after the fire, 1871, the city of Chicago put out the call to architects to move here if they want some work, and those architects who moved here rebuilt Chicago in a lot more dense fashion. Those architects who moved here built with brick instead of wood, built taller instead of shorter, and as a result of all that experimentation, the first steel structure, the first skyscraper in world history is built in Chicago's downtown in 1885, just a few years after the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. For all human history, all construction had been wood, stone, or brick. So that first steel structure building is a great break with the past. The location today of where the fire began, about 5 blocks away to our right, in O'Leary's barn. Anyone know what's there today? Sometimes there's a fireman on board who knows what's there. Today, the location of O'Leary's barn, where the fire began, is the Chicago Fire Department Training Academy. And you can go walk in that lobby of that training academy and see the fireman's cross on the floor, which is the exact, air quotes, exact spot where the fire broke out in O'Leary's barn. No one really knows the exact spot, but it's pretty close by, like 5-10 feet or so. The next and quicker act of Chicago's foundational story is the World's Fair of 1893, held along the lakefront on the city's south side. Daniel Burnham is the chief architect of that World's Fair, and Burnham designs a whole city of impermanent buildings painted white and built in the Greek and Roman styles. 27 million people come to the World's Fair of 1893 over 6 months, and those folks go back home to wherever they came from and tell their friends that Chicago truly had become a world-class city in the years after the Great Chicago Fire. The last remaining structure of the World's Fair is the Museum of Science and Industry, which you can go see today after our tour in Jackson Park along the lakefront. The most notable object in that Museum of Science and Industry, is the full-size World War II German submarine that rests in the basement. It's the only naval vessel captured in the high seas in 100 years. The whole backstory of that submarine's captured by the Allies during World War II is wild, and we don't have time to tell it because I already talked too fast. But you can go take a tour of that submarine, walk down like right in the middle of it on a guided tour. The last and quickest act of our foundational story of Chicago is the Burnham Plan of 1909. The city of Chicago reached out to the same architect of the World's Fair, Daniel Burnham, and asked for a plan to accommodate Chicago's growth for the next 100 years. His solution is the Burnham Plan of 1909, and we've already seen many elements of the Burnham Plan in action. Daniel Burnham had studied architecture in Paris. Burnham wanted to make Chicago the Paris on the prairie, and he modeled the new, wider Michigan Avenue, which we passed, on the wide boulevards of Paris, France. Also on the Burnham Plan was the Riverwalk, which we passed on the left, modeled after the river that cuts through Paris, the Seine. And the last thing I'll mention on the Burnham Plan was the extensive lakefront and park system here in Chicago today. The whole lakefront is parked from the north to the south, thanks to the Burnham Plan of 1909. So that's Chicago's foundational story in 3 quick acts. The Great Chicago Fire destroyed the city, but the city came back stronger. The World's Fair of 1893 cemented Chicago's status as a world-class city. And the Burnham Plan of 1909 creates a vision of beauty for the next 100 years that we get to enjoy today on this lovely, lovely morning. As you can see, our Captain Kibble is turning us around because I assume nobody wants to go out to the Gulf of Mexico in New Orleans, which is where we get to in about 2 weeks south at this pace. We've got a lot of potato chips. I inspected the box myself this morning. All right. Suit yourselves. Well, instead of turning around, or instead of going out to New Orleans, we will turn around. We'll go out to the front door of the Chicago River, the Chicago Harbor Locks area. We'll have a great view of downtown Chicago from the Locks area. As we turn, I'll again come around to see if anyone's got any questions. Flag me down if you do. Now's a great time to grab a drink or to use the restroom. We'll have a great view of the tallest building in Chicago, that tall black building with a 2 wide antenna. That tall black building is Sears or Willis Tower. We'll talk about that building when I get back on the mic in a few minutes. Said you have to have your building 30 feet away to model our Riverwalk after the Riverwalk in San Antonio, Texas. So everyone wins with this building. The Chicagoans can walk along the river right here, and the office space just starts on the 3rd floor with this office building. First 3 floors are kind of dedicated to retail space, elevator space, and a lobby. We'll now come into what I like to call the architectural time machine, and we'll have some nice shade as well. To see 5 buildings built in chronological order, starting with this building here on the left-hand side. Civic Opera building here on the left. 1929, Art Deco. See the 3 elements of Art Deco: soaring vertical lines, defensive windows, and this huge setback. See that setback? This is the most common form of a setback for an Art Deco structure in the 20s. See that throne shape? That's the throne shape setback. See this big rectangle here to our left where it says Civic Opera building? That's the Opera House, or at least the back of the Opera House. The big idea of this structure was that the office space to the left, office space to the right, and office space to the top would pay for the opera in the center. Pretty good idea, right? Self-supporting opera. You're not going to have to cold call anyone for money or spam anyone for money. With this opera, what could possibly ever go wrong? Well, a whole bunch of things. The Civic Opera Building opens up 2 weeks before the Great Stock Market Crash of 1929. The founder of the opera, Samuel Insull, was revealed to be a major financial fraudster. The stock market crash has an Enron-like scandal, and Samuel Insull flees to France to avoid prosecution. The Civic Opera Building goes right into bankruptcy upon completion of construction. But fortunately, the Lyric Opera is there today. The Lyric Opera is very successful. West Side Story is going on right now. So the Art Deco era, the Roaring '20s, ends with the stock market crash of 1929, which was followed by the Great Depression, which is followed by World War II. So there's not a lot of office buildings built between 1929 and this area here on the right-hand side. See these two black boxes here on the right? Gateway 1 and Gateway 2. This is what a commercial office building looks like in the 60s after a 30-year pause. A commercial office construction. We saw a black box before, the AMA building by Mies van der Rohe. 2 more black boxes right here. They're doing some work on the outsides. These are by Skidmore, Owens & Merrill, not by Mies van der Rohe. Note how kind of not well kept up the outside of this building looks. They're doing some work on it. We'll have a better view of the AMA building by Mies van der Rohe. This building looks run down. When we see the AMA building from the other side, you'll see how clean and perfect it looks. Mies van der Rohe is Mies van der Rohe has had many famous mottos. One was that God is in the details. So he planned for the degradation of the exterior over 50 or 100 years. This outside is falling apart. Mies van der Rohe's buildings hold together. We'll go from the 60s now to the 70s with this white boxy structure on the way. See this white boxy structure on the right? Looks a lot like this black box, but it's in white, has some gray at the base and stretches up at the top. In the 70s, modernist architects, which is what the style is, got a little bored with that boring black box and got a little crazy and built white boxes and yellow boxes, and beige boxes, red boxes. You'll see all kind of these boxes with a little color from the 70s. There was this style called the boxy style. Modernism was most popular in Europe in the 20s and 30s, but most modernist architects from Europe fled Europe to come to the US during World War II and influenced architecture. So that explains why there's all these boxes in Chicago and New York from the 60s and 70s. So we'll get out of the boxy era and the end of our time machine on the right-hand side. See this curvy building on the right? This curvy building has a curve that imitates the curve of the river. To reduce sway. There's no top of the control there, because it's not regular to people that we always have to work on. A little bit looking for enticing, still being first it's been 100 people in the building. That building, these circles we're passing on the right, those holes are functional as well. They're there to ventilate that live active train line that cuts right below. This curvy blue building to the right pairs really nicely with this curvy green building to the left. That's kind of, the sun's kind of in our eyes, but these two curvy buildings function like the twin curvy gatekeepers of the south branch of the Chicago River, which we are about to go down. See this Y-shaped building right in front of us? Car elevator all the way up to his floor and drive right out onto the office space in a little parking spot that was on every floor. So that interior car elevator functioned from 1926 when the building was built until 1941. In the 40s, cars got way too big to fit in the 1920s car elevator. So they then demolished the car elevator and added 25% of each office plate back to the leasable office space. The Jewelers Building, 1926. We go from the 20s on the left to this black boxy structure on the right. See this black box on the right, clad in this black steel and glass. We'll see this building again on the way back. This is the AMA building, designed by Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. This is Mies van der Rohe's last and largest building. Black boxy structure here on the right-hand side. Mies van der Rohe's very famous motto was less is more. Mies van der Rohe is the father of the style of black box modernism. We'll see this building again later on. When we come off from under this next week, we'll talk about these two twin corncob towers appearing here on the right-hand side. See these white boxy structures? These twin corncob towers were designed by a student of Mies van der Rohe named Bertrand Goldberg. If your teacher tells you to build black boxes, what does the student do? Build white circles. Of course, that's what Bertrand Goldberg did. Bertrand Goldberg wanted people to live in downtown Chicago in the 60s when not many people did so. So he built a city within a city that has all of the services a tenant would need. When this was completed in 68, the area to the right was low-rise industrial. Area to the left, mid-rise office. So these twin corncob towers floated over downtown Chicago, especially from the tenant-accessible rooftops. You'll notice the units have these little kind of petal leaf facades. Each unit is a little pie-shaped apartment, very small, but they feel very big because of the, at least initial view you would have when the building was built across Chicago. But unfortunately, all these buildings now kind of box in Marina City, so the big idea has kind of been lost. See this shiny building here on the left-hand side? Draw your eyes up to the top of that building. You'll see each side of the building has a Greek temple on top. See those Greek temples on top of that structure? 77 West Wacker. The building has a bottom, middle, and top, also called a base, shaft, and capital. That's part of that classic Greek temple design. The building has an interior lobby that is Greek temple themed. There's a Greek orb inside the structure. This is an example of postmodernism. This is the reaction to that black box style we just saw by Mies van der Rohe. This style, postmodernism, is very popular in the 80s and early 1990s. Postmodernist structures are very dreamlike, very surreal. Postmodernist buildings often harken back to a prior classic era. This building harkens back to ancient Greece. Riverwalk here on the left-hand side. There are 6 areas of the Riverwalk. Each area has its own theme. As you can see, there's these black rub rails, so you can just pull up your boat right there and grab a drink, meet some friends. Most of the areas of the Riverwalk have a rub rail you can just tie up to and hang out. So it's a big party scene in the city of Chicago in the evenings. You'll see that if you want to walk along the Riverwalk here, it's really nice in the evening as the sun goes down. You'll see a red brick building here on the right-hand side next. The red brick building is the Reed Murdoch building on the right. We'll count the bays of windows on the right. Next, let's count them up. I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bays of windows on the right. Let's count the bays of windows on the left. I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bays of windows on the left. Wait, hold on. Why are there 5 windows on the left, 6 on the right? Well, they had to widen this road in front of us, LaSalle Street, in 1930, after the Reed Murdoch building was inconveniently built in 1914. So to accommodate the widening of LaSalle Street, they just demolished a whole bay of windows here on the left in 1930 and built it right back up to make it look like they never touched it. The first skyscraper in world history was built in Chicago in 1885. All early tall buildings in Chicago or New York City in the 1980s or 1890s look like this red brick building here on the right-hand side. See this red brick structure? 1914, Chicago School of Psychology. An example of the first Chicago School of Architecture, the first architectural style of tall office buildings. The mantra of the first Chicago School of Architecture is that form follows function. A building's design should reflect its use. This was a tea and coffee warehouse when built. The first Chicago School is a very simple style of architecture, often embraces the soaring lines. You often get those large rectangular windows. And you see a division between bottom, middle, and top. There's several of those in downtown Chicago of this style, the first Chicago School. We'll go from the 1910s on the right to the late 1920s on the right. See this gray, large, horizontal structure? Merchandise Mart, when built in 1930, was the largest building in the world by square feet. It held that title until the Pentagon was constructed. It's an example of a style of architecture popular in the late 1920s called Art Deco. The building has 3 elements of Art Deco we'll see over and over again today because there's a lot of Art Deco in Chicago. See these soaring vertical lines? Those soaring vertical lines draw your eye up and make the building look way taller than it even is. Those soaring lines are created by deep inset windows, and the building recedes level by level at the top. You see that at the top? Those are called setbacks at the top. So we'll see those 3 elements of soaring lines, deep inset windows, and some version of setback at the top over and over again today on our tour. We'll now come into Wolf Point. This is where the main branch of the Chicago River we're on meets the north branch of the river to the right and the south branch of the river to the left. This is what I call the trophy case of Chicago architecture. We're surrounded by almost entirely new buildings right here. That's new, that's new, that's new, new. This one to our left actually is a little old, even though it looks new. It's from the 1980s. The building here to the right is Salesforce Tower, most recently built office building in the city of Chicago, probably the last office building built in Chicago for a very long time. Salesforce Tower here to our right just opened up 2 weeks ago. Moved in. Fresh office building for you there. The Union Stockyards used to be down the river to our left-hand side. The Union Stockyards were the largest meat processing plant in the United States from the end of the Civil War well into the 1900s. So meat barges would bring a lot of meat up this river from the South Branch and get frozen at a pink building you see on the right-hand side. That pink building coming to view is Fulton House. That pink building I'm pointing at is from 1898, oldest building we'll talk about on this tour. The current version of this building was designed by an architect named Harry Weese. Harry Weese was a civic-minded architect working in Chicago in the 70s and 80s. Harry Weese bought all this land right in front of us and far to the right in the 70s, envisioned multiple residential buildings, each with a dock and a 275-boat marina. Pretty cool to think that the original vision of downtown could have been residential and boat-based. Unfortunately, Harry Weese's business partner stole the land by falsifying land deeds, sold the land, kept the cash for himself, leaving Harry Weese high and dry. But unfortunately, Harry did develop this building right in front of us into condominiums in the 1980s. Because that pink building was a cold storage facility, a big freezer for meat, Harry Weese had to de-thaw that building for 6 whole months before he started construction on his condominiums. And he had to cut through a full foot of that red brick in order to create all those windows and patios. None of those windows and patios were there when it was a big freezer, a cold storage facility, because the cold would have escaped, right? This bridge in front of us is Carroll Street Railroad Bridge, 1908. When built in 1908, was the heaviest and longest bridge of its type. Most interesting to us because of that little hunk of concrete hanging out the back. All the bridges we went under have that exact same type of piece of concrete hanging out the back. You just can't see them because they're hidden underground. Here you get to see how a Chicago bridge works. Kind of a seesaw kind of thing. And we have a little more to talk about Harry Weese here on the left. You see a triangular structure here on the left-hand side. This triangle was also built by Harry Weese, although he didn't share this land with his business partner. That's why he kept it, nor did he share this with his business partner. So these were not stolen, but Harry Weese built this building to retire in the 80s. Unfortunately, his wife never let him move in. His wife forced him to retire in Old Town, where he also had built a home. Harry Weese had traveled Europe as a college student and modeled this home and after river cottages he saw along the Danube in Hungary. So think of these as postmodernist, surreal, dreamlike Hungarian river cottages. Harry Weese was an avid sailor, and you see these triangles all over the building that are reminiscent of sails, and you see portholes all over the building too. Harry Weese wanted to be able to walk out of his front door onto a sailboat and get out onto the lake. But it's 3 vertical condominiums. 3 of the 4 original families still reside in the unit they bought in the 1980s. The third from the left was sold about 6 years ago for $2.5 million. As we come out from under this bridge, I'll jump off the mic for a few minutes. We're going to turn around because I assume nobody wants to go up to Wisconsin today, which is where we end up going north in about 2 or 3 days at this pace. So no votes for Green Bay. Suit yourselves. We'll instead turn around. We'll go down the south branch of the river next, which we pass on the left. A lot of great buildings are down that south branch. Sears or Willis Tower, the tallest building in Chicago, is down the south branch. As we turn, I'll come around to see if anyone has any questions. Flag me down if you do. I'll be back on the mic in a few to restart our tour. Now's a great time to grab a drink or use the restroom down those stairs behind you. That's the Jewelers Building, another European revivalist or neoclassical building.